So here we're going to talk about installing Compiz. Compiz was the desktop environment that I showed you earlier. Now, this is one of the more fun things you can do with Linux. This is something you can point at Windows saying your computer can't do this. So the setup, we go back to Ubuntu Software Center. And we type in Compiz. You gotta spell it right too. So C-O-M-P-I-Z, Compiz. So here are some of the applications we need, but you really need to do the show 20 technical items. So here I'm gonna go download and install everything I need for Compiz to run, and then I'll explain what I did afterwards. I made a mistake, guys. You don't need Compiz plugins dev. So we're going to hit the little X to stop this from downloading. Now all of these extras and main plugins that we're adding allow Compiz to be a little bit more versatile. So I'll just give you a once-over of all the things you need for Compiz to run. Everything with a check mark by it needs to be installed. So first off, we have Compiz, and we have OpenGL Window and Compositing Manager. We have Compiz Fusion Icon, Compiz Config Settings Manager, Compiz Plugins Main Collection, OpenGL Window and Compositing Manager Default Plugins, Compiz Fusion Configuration System, gconf Backend, Compiz Plugins Main Default Collection, Compiz Window Decoration Library, OpenGL Window and Compositing Manager Plugins, OpenGL Window and Compositing Manager GNOME Windows Decorator, collection of extra open compositing for Compiz, Compiz Configs Binding for Python, Transitional Dummy Package, and Transitional Dummy Package. These are Compiz Fusion Plugins Extras and Compiz Fusion Plugins Main. So those are the applications you need to install. So then we can close this. So now to find the new Compiz stuff that we installed. It's right here. However, if this was not here, then we would go to the dash home and type CCSM, or Compiz Config Settings Manager. So we'll open this up. So now this is a warning, and you should definitely heed this warning. This is an advanced tool, used with caution. I have, accidentally before, completely destroyed my window manager, to the point where I had just a text-based system. So be very careful with what you do with this. I kinda like to have it show every time, just to make sure I remember. So first off, the ones you're going to want to check are Desktop Cube, and click on Disable Desktop Wall, then Rotate Cube. With Compiz, when you're working with the settings, your system can stop entirely, and all of your windows can disappear like you saw. However, they will eventually come back. You just have to be really patient with this application. It's changing settings with your window manager, so be very patient with it. I also like to have 3D windows enabled, so I'm going to check that. And then cube reflection and deformation. I'm also going to check that. Wobbly windows is one of my favorite things, so I'm going to check that as well. And then I'm going to say disable snapping windows. So you can see everything disappeared again, but it all came back. And again, this has come up, so just say leave closed. Finally, that seems to be about it. However, you can change settings for other things. So I'm going to go to the settings for this. So the deformation I want to be a cylinder, so I'm happy with that. Now each of these has settings underneath it. Usually the default settings are pretty good, so I leave them where they're at. So I'm going to close this now, and then I'm going to reboot my system. This is not necessary, however, it could be helpful in the long run. So I'm just going to say restart at this point. So now I'm back after restarting my computer. You can see everything looks about the same. However, there are some new things that Compiz allowed us to do, such as wobbly windows. To activate the workspace switcher, you can either use the original method like this, or you can hold Ctrl-Alt and then the arrow keys will determine which way you go. So I'm going to hit right. So now I've got a rotating cylinder. So you can see my application sits off of the desktop and it's a rotated 3D cylinder. So now if I rotate to one of the sides and then open another application, and then rotate, you can see that now I have two applications on two different desktops. All of the settings for how Compiz operates are under the CCSM or Compiz Config Settings Manager. So right here, you can always go back into this and change some of the settings, such as the distance and zoom from the rotated cube, as well as turn things on and off, such as the wobbly windows. I prefer to leave all that on, so I'm happy with the way it is. There's also other application-specific things you can enable, such as a shelf. The shelf allows you to make windows smaller to get them out of your way. The way you do this, the default settings are the super key, Alt, and then scroll. So now I have this little tiny application. It more or less gets it out of the way for me. So if we go back into CCSM, or Compiz Config Settings Manager, there are other settings just like that. Now, I'm not really good with the shelf. I tend to make applications smaller that I don't really want smaller, so I'm going to turn that back off. Now, we've also got the window switcher. So we've got the shift switcher. I usually say ignore conflicts, so I'm going to click ignore. Then I'm going to close this. So now that allows me to have multiple windows open. Like so. So now with all these windows open, I do Shift Super S, and now I have a cover flow style switcher between all of the windows that I have open. There are several different types of window switchers as well. This isn't the only one. Another one that I'm more of a fan of is the ring switcher. So this is the way this one works. I prefer this one because I can see all my windows. So that's a brief look at Compiz as a window manager and settings manager.